November 7th, 1942. The grey Atlantic rolls beneath U-130's hull as Captain Lieutenant Ernst Kals presses padded headphones against his ears. His hydrophone operator, Oberbootsmann Fischer, adjusts the Gruppenhochgerät's directional wheel with practiced precision. Through the steel hull, transmitted through cold water, comes the unmistakable rhythm of merchant screws, dozens of them. Fischer's voice cuts through the submarine's mechanical hum. Bearing 270, Herr Kaleun. Multiple contacts. Convoy strength. He pauses, rotating the wheel again, his expression shifting from concentration to confusion. Captain Lieutenant, I'm counting at least 80 propeller signatures, merchants and escorts mixed together. Kals slides the headphones from Fischer's station and listens himself. The ocean whispers its secrets through piezoelectric crystals pressed against the hull. Heavy freighters lumber along at 8 knots, their slow rhythm like distant thunder. But, between them, circling, probing, racing across the formation's edges, come faster signatures. Destroyers. Many destroyers. He counts silently, marking each distinct mechanical heartbeat. After 5 minutes of careful listening, he removes the headphones and returns to the periscope. Surface at twilight. We'll transmit a contact report and shadow until the wolfpack arrives. What Kals cannot yet comprehend is that he has stumbled upon the largest amphibious operation attempted in military history. 102 American warships shepherding 39 transport vessels toward the Moroccan coast. Operation Torch is moving through waters Germany believed it controlled, protected by escorts that outnumber the merchants they guard. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The mathematics of submarine warfare in November 1942 rested on brutal simplicity. A typical North Atlantic convoy contained 40 to 50 merchant ships, protected by 6 to 8 escorts. Wolfpack doctrine, perfected by Admiral Karl Dönitz over 3 years of relentless experimentation, exploited this numerical reality. 20 U-boats converging on a convoy overwhelmed the defensive screen through sheer mathematics. While escorts chased one submarine, others struck from different bearings. Darkness amplified German advantages. Surfaced U-boats matched merchant ship speed while remaining invisible against moonlit spray. This system had nearly strangled Britain. Between January and August 1942, German submarines sent more than 500 Allied vessels to the bottom. Churchill himself later admitted that the U-boat threat frightened him more than any other aspect of the war. In convoy after convoy, escorts scrambled between contacts, while torpedoes flashed through defensive gaps. U-130 had sailed from Lorient on October 28th, one of 25 Atlantic boats recalled from regular patrol patterns. BW headquarters transmitted cryptic orders. Major Allied operation suspected. Proceed grid squares northwest of Gibraltar. Maintain radio silence except contact reports. The lack of specificity troubled experienced commanders. Dönitz typically provided detailed intelligence about convoy routes, composition, and estimated escort strength. This operation felt different. Kals brought credentials that commanded respect among Germany's submarine arm. His previous patrol in U-130 had netted 13 ships sunk off the American coast during Operation Drumbeat. He understood the psychology of merchant sailors, the timing of convoy procedures, the precise moment when darkness and confusion created opportunities. But those American waters had offered targets sailing alone or with minimal protection. Individual freighters silhouetted against blazing coastal cities, navigating without blackout, discipline, broadcasting positions through casual radio traffic. The North Atlantic demanded different skills. Here, convoys maintained strict radio silence, escorts carried increasingly sophisticated detection equipment, and British tactical doctrine improved with each engagement. Still, the basic arithmetic favoured attackers. U-boats hunted in packs of 20 or more. Convoys typically fielded 8 defenders. Even accounting for British aggressive tactics and improving technology, those numbers guaranteed successful penetrations. As U-130 surfaced at 1900 hours on November 7th, Kals studied the horizon through spray-soaked binoculars. Darkness came early in November Atlantic waters. Heavy cloud cover eliminated starlight, reducing visibility to occasional silhouettes against slightly lighter sky. Perfect conditions for the prowling wolf. The convoy materialized gradually. First, the masthead lights of lead ships appeared as pinpricks against blackness. Then hull shapes resolved from shadows, massive freighters ploughing through moderate swells. Kals counted methodically. Row 1, 7 ships. Row 2, 8 ships. Row 3, 6 ships. The formation stretched across miles of ocean, maintaining station with professional discipline. But between the merchants, circling like sheepdogs around a flock, moved shapes that made Kals grip his binoculars tighter. Destroyers, not the handful he expected, but scores of them. Fast, aggressive, their bows throwing spray as they patrolled the convoy's perimeter. He counted 12 on the visible northern flank alone. How many protected the southern approach? How many ranged ahead as advanced screens? His executive officer, Oberleutnant Sir C. Heinrich Schroeter, emerged from the conning tower hatch. Remarkable sight, Herr Kaleun. I've never seen so many warships shepherding a single convoy. Kals lowered his binoculars. Neither have I. This isn't a standard convoy. Get me a transmission ready, for Bideau. They need to know what's heading south. While Schroeter descended to prepare the coded message, Kals continued his assessment. Standard doctrine called for shadowing from maximum hydrophone range, approximately 20 kilometers, while transmitting periodic position updates. Other Wolfpack members would converge on the contact, forming an attack group. Once sufficient U-boats gathered, they would coordinate a surface assault under darkness, penetrating between escort positions, launching torpedoes at close range, then withdrawing before organized counterattacks developed. But looking at this formation, with its unprecedented escort density, Kals questioned whether standard doctrine applied. The northern screen alone matched the total escort strength of typical convoys. How many destroyers protected the entire formation? 30? 40? More? U-130's radio operator transmitted the contact report at 1945 hours. Convoy strength estimated 100. Ships. Course 190 degrees. Speed 8 knots. Grid square northwest of Gibraltar. Kals added a notation that troubled him even as he composed it. Escort strength exceptionally heavy. Recommend maximum wolfpack concentration before attack. The transmission lasted 17 seconds. In a different era of the war, that would have been inconsequential. British direction-finding equipment from early 1942 required multiple transmissions to establish accurate bearings. By the time escorts triangulated a position, the U-boat had dived and relocated. But November 1942 marked a technological inflection point. High-frequency direction-finding equipment, called Huff-Duff by Allied sailors, now detected and plotted radio transmissions in seconds. Compact enough to fit on corvettes and destroyers, it transformed every German message into a self-inflicted beacon. Aboard the destroyer USS Wilkes, Lieutenant Robert Morrison watched his Huff-Duff operators needle snap to bearing 287 degrees. Contact, sir. Single transmission. Range estimated 12 to 15 miles. Morrison studied his plot board. The bearing placed the transmission northwest of the convoy's screening destroyers, exactly where a shadowing U-boat would lurk. He reached for the voice radio, connecting him to other escorts. Unlike earlier convoy battles fought through blinking signal lamps and flag semaphore, the Operation Torch Task Force communicated in real time through talk between ships radio networks. All escorts, Wilkes. Huff-Duff contact bearing 287 degrees from formation center, probable submarine transmission. Northern screen investigate. 3 destroyers accelerated toward the bearing, their 10-centimeter radar sweeping for surface targets that earlier equipment would have missed. This was the technological revolution Kals didn't yet comprehend. The ocean had learned to answer back, instantly and precisely. 2-1-30's watch, the officer called down from the conning tower. Destroyer screws approaching fast from the south, range decreasing rapidly. Kals lunged for the diving alarm. The klaxon's harsh blare sent crew members scrambling to stations as seawater flooded into ballast tanks. The submarine's bow angled sharply downward. 35 seconds after the alarm, U-130's conning tower slipped beneath Atlantic swells, leaving only disturbed water marking where the predator had prowled. Inside the pressure hull, emergency lighting cast red shadows across instrument panels, and the faces of 48 crew members who understood their survival depended on depth, silence, and the skills of men hunting them above. The destroyer's sonar pings echoed through the submarine's steel skin like hammer blows against a bell. Kals ordered depth increased to 60 meters, the sweet spot where thermal layers might deflect sonar pulses, while remaining shallow enough for rapid surfacing if needed. The submarine prepped southeast at 2 knots on electric motors, conserving battery power, putting distance between itself and the hunting destroyers. After 40 minutes, the sonar pings faded. U-130 had successfully evaded, executing a maneuver practiced countless times during training. But something fundamental had changed. The ocean no longer offered concealment. A 17-second radio transmission had brought 3 destroyers racing toward them with precision that seemed impossible. How had the escorts triangulated their position so quickly? How had they arrived on bearing within minutes of the transmission? Schroeter voiced the question, troubling every experienced crew member. Herr Kaleun, they shouldn't have found us that fast. Not from a single transmission. Kals studied his charts without responding. The answer seemed impossible, yet the evidence was undeniable. The British or Americans had developed direction-finding equipment far more sophisticated than intelligence reports suggested. That revelation carried disturbing implications. Every contact report, every tactical coordination with other U-boats, every routine transmission to headquarters now advertised their location to escorts equipped with this new technology. He made a decision that contradicted standard wolfpack doctrine. We maintain radio silence, no further transmissions unless absolutely critical. We'll shadow hydrophones only and surface at dawn to assess the situation. Throughout the night of November 7th to 8th, U-130 tracked the convoy by sound alone. Fischer's hydrophones followed the mechanical symphony of 100 ships ploughing south. Kals surfaced briefly every 2 hours, staying up just long enough to fix position and bearing, then diving immediately to avoid detection. The procedure violated Beidu's insistence on maintaining constant surface shadowing, but Kals trusted his instincts more than headquarters doctrine. By dawn on November 8th, 4 additional German submarines had reached the contact area. U-173, U-402, U-459, and U-569 spread across the convoy's expected track, forming a patrol line 30 kilometers wide. Each commander had received Kals's initial contact report. Each expected to engage a large but normally escorted formation. U-173's commander, Korvettenkapitän Heinz Ehler Beuker, surfaced at 06:15 hours to scan the horizon. What he saw forced him to call his executive officer and navigator to the conning tower bridge. The convoy stretched across the dawn horizon like a city afloat. Massive transport ships formed tight columns, their grey hulls barely visible against grey water beneath grey sky. But surrounding them, ahead of them, behind them, moved destroyers. Not in the sparse protective screen Beuker expected, but in multiple layered rings. Close escorts circled the merchant columns. Medium-range destroyers patrolled 3 kilometers out. Long-range screens ranged ahead and on the flanks, their bows throwing white spray as they maintained high-speed sweeps. Beuker counted carefully, marking each warship on his plotting board. After 15 minutes of observation, he arrived at a number that seemed absurd. 43 destroyers and escorts visible from his position alone. The convoy's southern flank, hidden beyond the horizon, likely held equal strength. His navigator, a veteran of 17 patrols, stared at the formation with visible disbelief. "Herr Kaleun, those aren't standard British convoy escorts. Look at the hull numbers. Those are American destroyers, new construction. I can see at least 6 escort carriers among the formation." Escort carriers. The revelation shifted tactical calculations into nightmare territory. Unlike the handful of land-based aircraft that might patrol convoy routes during daylight, escort carriers provided continuous air coverage. Their aircraft could hunt submarines around the clock, using radar to detect surfaced boats even in darkness or heavy weather. The air gap that made mid-Atlantic operations relatively safe had been eliminated by ships that brought the aircraft with them. Bucker drafted a detailed contact report, carefully noting escort composition, visible carrier strength, and his assessment that this represented no ordinary convoy. He transmitted at 06:45 hours, then immediately crash-dived as his radio operator reported the message sent. The Huff-Duff response came within 90 seconds. 4 destroyers detached from the northern screen and raced toward U-173's last known position. By the time they arrived, Bucker had taken his boat to 70 meters depth and crept away at silent running speed, but the pattern was now undeniable. Every transmission brought immediate hunter response. At BDU headquarters in Paris, Admiral Dönitz studied the accumulating contact reports with growing comprehension that something unprecedented was occurring. By mid-morning November 8th, he had received position updates from 6 submarines. All reported the same massive formation. All noted escort strength far exceeding normal patterns. 2 mentioned escort carriers. 1 identified what appeared to be capital ships, battleships, or heavy cruisers, providing additional protection. Dönitz's tactical maps showed the convoy's course pointed directly toward Morocco, the timing aligned with intelligence suggesting Allied landings in North Africa. If that assessment proved correct, this wasn't merely a large convoy. It was an amphibious assault force carrying tens of thousands of troops to establish a new front against Germany. The strategic implications cascaded through his analysis. Such an operation required months of preparation, massive logistical coordination, and complete communications security. That the Allies had assembled 100 ships and at least 50 escorts without German intelligence. Detecting the build-up represented a profound failure of the entire intelligence apparatus. But more immediately troubling was the tactical problem. Standard wolfpack doctrine assumed numerical advantage. 20 U-boats attacking 8 escorts created overwhelming offensive pressure. But if this convoy truly carried 50 to 60 escorts, the mathematics inverted. Now the defenders held numerical superiority. They could dedicate multiple destroyers to prosecuting each submarine contact while maintaining dense protective screens around the merchants. Dönitz had dedicated his professional life to submarine warfare theory. He understood implicitly what his commanders in the Atlantic were discovering through shock and confusion. Traditional attack methods wouldn't work against this formation. The convoy was too heavily defended, the escorts too numerous, the air coverage too comprehensive. Range shadowing, report course and speed changes, coordinate for simultaneous attack when sufficient force assembled. The directive acknowledged reality while attempting to salvage tactical initiative. If enough U-boats gathered, perhaps 20 or more, they might overwhelm even heavy escort density through coordinated strikes from multiple bearings. It was desperate mathematics, requiring perfect coordination and aggressive execution against opponents who had already demonstrated superior technology. U-402's commander, Kapitänleutnant Baron Siegfried von Forstner, received Dönitz's orders while shadowing the convoy from 15 kilometers northeast. Von Forstner represented Prussian naval aristocracy, educated at Muurwick Naval Academy, decorated for actions during the Norwegian campaign, survivor of 3 years' continuous combat operations. He understood submarine tactics with the intuition born from experience. Reading Bidieu's directive, he recognized the underlying pessimism. Dönitz rarely ordered his commanders to avoid independent attacks. The wolfpack system's strength lay in commanders' freedom to exploit opportunities as they emerged. This order to wait for mass coordination signaled that headquarters recognized the normal rules no longer applied. Von Forstner studied the convoy through his periscope, careful to expose only minimal lens above wave crests. The formation maintained impressive discipline. Merchant ships held precise station. Escorts patrolled established patterns with professional competence. He saw no obvious weaknesses, no gaps in the defensive screen, no stragglers vulnerable to approach. Most unsettling was the air coverage. Aircraft circled continuously overhead, their presence eliminating the surface stalking that made U-boats deadly. Any submarine attempting to close with the convoy on the surface would be spotted within minutes, and attacked by aircraft arriving faster than emergency dives could save them. He dictated observations for his war diary. Enemy convoy represents new operational reality. Escort density eliminates traditional penetration tactics. Air coverage prevents surface approach. Recommend developing new doctrine for heavily defended formations or concentrating attacks on less protected targets elsewhere. By afternoon November 8th, 9 German submarines tracked the convoy across 200 square kilometers of ocean. 9 more boats raced toward the contact area from patrol stations as far away as the Azores. But even as this concentration developed, the operational reality became increasingly clear. The Allies had fundamentally changed the tactical equation. U-569, attempting to close within torpedo range, found herself bracketed by depth charges from 3 different destroyers. She survived only by diving to 120 meters and enduring 90 minutes of systematic hunting. When she finally surfaced hours later, the convoy had vanished beyond hydrophone range. U-459, attempting a daylight periscope approach, detected approaching aircraft radar signatures and crash dived with only seconds to spare. She remained submerged for 5 hours, battery reserves depleting to dangerously low levels, before surfacing to find herself alone in empty ocean. The pattern repeated across the entire wolfpack. Submarines that tried aggressive tactics found themselves hunted immediately. Those that maintained cautious shadowing discovered they couldn't maintain contact against escorts that seemed to detect them through methods beyond understanding. The ocean had become hostile territory where hunters found themselves hunted. Kals in U-130 attempted one carefully planned attack during the night of November 8th to 9th. He approached from astern, using darkness and favorable sea conditions to surface within 8 kilometers of the convoy's rear guard. Through his night binoculars, he selected targets 3 large transport ships in the formation's second-to-last row. His torpedo crew loaded tubes 1 through 4. Kals calculated firing solutions, accounting for target speed, distance, and sea state. At 02:15 hours, he gave the order to commence attack run. U-130 accelerated to 14 knots, closing the range to 4,000 meters. Then, without warning, searchlights blazed across the water from 2 destroyers converging from different bearings. The brilliant beams swept across wave crests, hunting for the submarine they somehow knew lurked in the darkness. Kals shouted diving orders, and U-130 plunged beneath the surface, seconds before shells began splashing around their last known position. Inside the pressure hull, the crew experienced the terrifying reality of depth charge attacks by multiple destroyers. The first pattern detonated close enough to knock men off their feet. Light bulbs shattered. Cork insulation rained from overhead. The submarine's frame groaned under pressure waves transmitted through incompressible seawater. Kals ordered the boat to 100 meters depth, then deeper still to 120 as sonar pings intensified. The destroyers above employed systematic search patterns, sweeping back and forth, maintaining contact through technologies the Germans couldn't counter. For 2 hours, U-130 endured intermittent depth charge attacks, each pattern forcing the crew to grip pipes and pray the hull integrity held. When they finally surfaced at 04:30 hours, Kals emerged to find himself alone on an empty ocean. The convoy had continued south while escorts dealt with his failed attack attempt. He had expended precious battery reserves, terrorized his crew, and accomplished nothing beyond confirming what he already suspected. The tactical balance had shifted irrevocably against submarines. November 9th brought the invasion itself. At 04:35 hours, American forces began landing operations at 3 sites along the Moroccan coast. Fedala, Media Port Liauti, and Safi became battlegrounds where 19,000 troops waded ashore under naval gunfire support. The French defenders, caught between loyalty to Vichy government and sympathy for Allied cause, offered sporadic resistance that ranged from vigorous to half-hearted. German submarines, still attempting to interfere with the amphibious operation, found themselves facing defensive densities beyond anything experienced in Atlantic convoy battles. The landing beaches, the transport areas, the approach channels all swarmed with destroyers, escort carriers, patrol craft, and anti-submarine aircraft. U-173 attempted to penetrate Fedala's anchorage, where transport ships offloaded troops and equipment. She navigated through coastal waters barely deep enough to permit submerged operations, her hydrophones tracking the cacophony of dozens of ships operating in confined space. At 0700 hours, Boyka brought his boat to periscope depth to assess the situation. What he saw through the narrow lens resembled nothing in submarine warfare doctrine. The anchorage held perhaps 30 transport ships, all actively unloading. But between those tempting targets moved at least 20 destroyers, constantly patrolling, their sonar pinging continuously. Aircraft circled overhead in thick formations, patrol boats threaded between larger vessels. The entire area resembled an armed fortress afloat. Boyka attempted to close within range, creeping at 2 knots through coastal currents. He brought his boat within 4,000 meters of the nearest transport before sonar detected his approach. 3 destroyers converged on his position with terrifying speed. Depth charges began detonating before he could even give diving orders. The boat was already at periscope depth, 50 feet below surface, but the shallowness of coastal waters limited evasion options. The attack lasted 12 minutes. When it ended, U-173 had suffered significant damage. Pressure leaks sprayed seawater into the control room. The port diesel engine showed cracked mounting bolts. The depth gauge ceased functioning. Boyka made the only rational decision. He withdrew from the area, limped north toward deeper water, and transmitted a damage report to Bidoyu. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. U-130 fared no better. Attempting to attack transport ships off Safi, Kals found himself trapped in shallow coastal waters, where escort destroyers knew every current and depth contour. When depth charges detonated above him at 09:15 hours, the concussions rattled his boat so violently that men screamed in terror. Flooding began in 3 separate compartments. Battery acid sloshed across deck plates. For several terrifying minutes, Kals believed his boat would become an iron tomb on the Moroccan coast. They survived by surfacing directly in front of the destroyer USS Mervine and immediately signaling surrender. Kals watched his crew scramble onto deck, arms raised, while American sailors pointed weapons from their destroyer's deck. U-130 settled slowly by the stern, her sea cocks open, carrying classified equipment and code books to the bottom. Kals and his crew became prisoners, but they lived. That outcome exceeded the fate of U-173, which struck a mine later that same day and sank with all hands. Or U-402, which surfaced directly beneath aircraft from escort carrier USS Suwannee and was destroyed by depth charges before she could dive. Or U-459, hunted for 16 hours straight by 4 different destroyers until battery depletion forced her to surface and scuttle. By November 11th, the pattern had become undeniable, even in Bidayu's Paris headquarters. 25 U-boats had been ordered to attack the Operation Torch forces. 8 had been sunk, 4 more suffered damage, requiring return to base. The remaining 13, scattered across hundreds of miles of ocean, reported the same devastating reality. The escorts were too numerous, the aircraft too persistent, the technology too advanced. Admiral Dönitz wrote in his war diary, "The enemy Admiral Dönitz wrote in his war diary, the enemy has succeeded in assembling escort and air forces of unexpected strength. Our standard tactical methods prove insufficient against such concentration, must develop new approach or risk unacceptable casualties." The admission marked a fundamental shift in German submarine strategy. For 3 years, wolfpack tactics had nearly severed Britain's Atlantic lifeline. Now, within 3 days, a single Allied operation had demonstrated that numerical escort superiority, combined with technological advantages, made traditional submarine warfare nearly suicidal. But the deeper lesson extended beyond tactical adjustments. Operation Torch represented industrial and organizational capacity that Germany couldn't match. The Americans had built 100 ships, assembled 50,000 troops, coordinated logistics across 3,000 miles of ocean, maintained complete operational security, and deployed escort forces that outnumbered the precious cargo they protected. That mathematical reversal spoke to resource abundance beyond German comprehension. In the Atlantic submarine campaign, both sides fought resource wars. Germany needed U-boats faster than Allied shipyards could build replacements. The Allies needed merchant ships faster than U-boats could sink them. For 3 years, that equation balanced precariously. Operation Torch revealed the equation had inverted. American shipyards launched merchant vessels faster than submarines could possibly sink them. American destroyer production exceeded anything Germany contemplated. American escort carrier construction transformed the Atlantic from a vast hunting ground into a surveilled battlefield where aircraft could reach any coordinate within hours. The submarine arm, once Germany's most cost-effective weapon, now faced opponents with unlimited replacement capacity. Ernst Kals, interrogated by American intelligence officers in Casablanca, struggled to articulate what he'd witnessed. The intelligence officers wanted tactical details, submarine capabilities, communications procedures, torpedo ranges. But Kals found himself describing something more fundamental. "You don't understand what it meant," he told his interrogators through a translator. "We expected 40 merchants with 8 escorts. Standard numbers. We train for those numbers. Our tactics work against those numbers. But you brought 100 ships protected by 50 destroyers. Where did those destroyers come from? How many more do you have?" The intelligence officer making notes didn't answer. The truth would have seemed like propaganda. In November 1942, American shipyards were completing 1 destroyer every 10 days. Escort carriers launched monthly. The industrial mobilization that began after Pearl Harbor was reaching full capacity, producing war material at scales that made Europe's industrial nations seem quaint by comparison. For German submarine commanders raised on doctrines of tactical excellence overcoming material deficiency, this reversal challenged fundamental beliefs. Prussia's military tradition emphasized superior training, better leadership, and tactical innovation compensating for smaller forces. That tradition had served Germany well from Frederick the Great through Bismarck to the opening years of this war. But industrialized warfare operated by different mathematics. Quality mattered, but quantity had a quality all its own. A dozen brilliantly trained U-boat crews couldn't sink 50 escorts before the escorts sank them. Superior submarine technology meant nothing if every patrol area swarmed with hunters equipped with radar, sonar, and huff-duff. The psychological impact on surviving U-boat crews manifested in ways that troubled BDU's staff officers. Submarines returning from patrols near Operation Torch reported unusual stress symptoms among crew members. Men who had survived previous battles, who had pressed home attacks against defended convoys, who had endured depth charge attacks with stoic professionalism, now exhibited hesitation and anxiety. One commander reported that during an attempted attack approach, his torpedo crew had frozen at their stations, unable to execute loading procedures they'd practiced hundreds of times. Investigation revealed no equipment malfunction. The crew had simply lost confidence that attacks could succeed. They'd heard too many stories from other boats about overwhelming escort responses, about depth charge attacks that lasted hours, about submarines that dove and never resurfaced. The term iron coffin took on new resonance. Earlier in the war, submarine crews understood risks, but believed tactical skill and courage could prevail. Now, many questioned whether any amount of skill mattered against opponents with unlimited resources and superior technology. The Atlantic no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like a death trap for men in steel tubes. Dönitz responded by temporarily withdrawing submarines from the central Atlantic and repositioning them to less defended areas. If heavily escorted convoys represented the new normal, U-boats would seek easier targets. The Caribbean, South Atlantic, and African coast offered merchant traffic with lighter protection. Better to sink 10 ships from poorly defended convoys than lose a submarine attacking fortress fleets. This strategic retreat marked an inflection point in the Battle of the Atlantic. From late November 1942 forward, German submarine operations never regained the aggressive confidence of earlier periods. Wolfpacks continued attacking convoys through 1943, but with decreasing success and mounting casualties. The hunters had been taught they could be hunted back, and that lesson proved impossible to unlearn. Operation Torch's naval component demonstrated principles that would define the war's final phases. Industrial capacity mattered more than tactical brilliance. Technological integration across air, surface, and electronic warfare domains created synergies that individual technical advantages couldn't overcome. Organizational sophistication in assembling and coordinating massive operations with complete security proved as valuable as combat effectiveness. For the Allied submarine commanders who survived, these lessons came at brutal cost. Of the 25 U-boats that attempted to interfere with Operation Torch, 8 were sunk and 4 severely damaged. Casualty rates among submarine crews, already the highest of any German military branch, climbed toward 50% killed in action. That grim statistic would eventually reach 75%. 3 out of every 4 submariners who began the war would die at sea. German naval architects responded by developing new submarine types. The Type XXI U-boat, introduced in 1944, incorporated revolutionary features: higher underwater speed, greater battery capacity, schnorkel breathing tubes that allowed diesel operation while submerged. But these technical improvements came too late and in too few numbers. By the time advanced submarines reached operational status, Allied air and surface forces controlled the Atlantic so completely that even superior boats couldn't operate effectively. The mathematics of attrition had become insurmountable. Germany could build approximately 40 U-boats per month at maximum production. The Allies sank approximately 30 per month throughout 1943 and 44. But American shipyards launched 80 merchant vessels monthly, replacing losses faster than submarines created them. British and American destroyer production exceeded 200 vessels annually. Escort carrier construction accelerated. Each new Allied ship carried improved radar, sonar, huff-duff, and communications equipment. Escort crews trained continuously, developing tactics specifically designed to counter submarine operations. Aircraft flew with advanced magnetic anomaly detectors capable of identifying submerged submarines from airborne platforms. The technological arms race, once relatively balanced, had tilted decisively toward the hunters. In prisoner of war camps, captured U-boat commanders traded stories about the moment they realized the war had turned. For Kals, that moment came when destroyers appeared within minutes of his first transmission, demonstrating detection capabilities he hadn't imagined possible. For Bürker, it arrived when he surfaced at dawn on November 8th and counted 43 escorts, protecting a single convoy. For von Forstner, the realization crystallized when aircraft forced him underwater repeatedly throughout one day, preventing any surface operations. Each story contained the same essential truth. The ocean had changed. The unlimited hunting grounds of 1940 to 41, when U-boats prowled with relative impunity, had transformed into contested space, where submarines fought simply to survive. The technological and numerical advantages that made wolfpack tactics devastatingly effective had evaporated against opponents with superior resources and organizational capacity. Intelligence analysts reviewing Operation Torch's naval component identified several factors contributing to German submarine failures. Huff-Duff direction-finding equipment eliminated radio shadowing tactics by instantly revealing transmission sources. 10-centimeter radar detected surfaced submarines beyond visual range, even in darkness or heavy weather. Escort carriers provided continuous air coverage, removing the mid-Atlantic gap where submarines previously operated safely. Coordinated voice radio communications allowed escort groups to respond collectively rather than individually. But underlying these tactical factors was strategic reality. America's entry into the war fundamentally altered resource equations. British shipyards, working at capacity since 1939, had been barely maintaining replacement rates for shipping losses. American production, ramping up throughout 1942, added capacity that exceeded Axis' ability to inflict losses. By late 1942, Allied shipbuilding surpassed sinkings by 3-to-1 margins that would grow to 5-to-1 by war's end. The psychological impact rippled through Germany's submarine arm. Crews departing on patrol no longer joked about visiting French cafes after successful missions. They wrote farewell letters to families before sailing, understanding statistically they wouldn't return. Training schools struggled to replace experienced officers, killed in action with recruits who'd never seen combat. Submarine pens at Lorient, Brest and Saint-Nazaire became somber places where mechanics worked on boats they expected would become tombs. Admiral Dönitz, promoted to Commander-in-Chief of the German Navy in January 1943, faced the reality that his beloved submarine arm was being systematically destroyed. He authorized increasingly desperate tactics, acoustic homing torpedoes, schnorkel equipment, even considered one-way kamikaze-style submarine attacks. None changed fundamental mathematics. Superior Allied resources, technology, and organizational capacity had created conditions where German submarine warfare couldn't succeed. The final irony resided in numbers. Operation Torch involved approximately 100 ships, protected by 50 to 60 escorts, roughly one warship for every 2 merchants. That represented the most heavily defended Allied convoy of the war, assembled specifically for amphibious assault operations requiring maximum protection. Yet within months, escort-to-merchant ratios across the Atlantic approached similar densities. What had shocked German commanders in November 1942 became routine by spring 1943. Wolfpacks that once terrorized convoys with 20 U-boats attacking 8 escorts now found themselves outnumbered by defensive forces. Support groups of destroyers and escort carriers hunted submarines independently of convoys, turning predators into prey. Very long-range aircraft closed the mid-Atlantic gap completely, providing coverage across the entire ocean. The submarine advantage that had nearly starved Britain evaporated in barely 6 months. Historians later identified May 1943 as the decisive month when Germany lost the Battle of the Atlantic. 43 U-boats sunk in 31 days forced Dönitz to temporarily withdraw submarines from North Atlantic operations entirely. The mathematical calculus had become unsustainable. Crews were dying faster than replacements could be trained. Boats were sinking faster than shipyards could build them. Tactical casualties exceeded any operational gains. But the decisive shift began in November 1942, when German submarine commanders first encountered convoys protected by escort forces that outnumbered the precious cargo they guarded. The psychological shock of discovering the ocean had become hostile territory, that every radio transmission invited immediate response, that destroyers lurked in numbers sufficient to prosecute every contact to destruction. These realizations broke the offensive confidence that had made wolfpack tactics so effective. Ernst Kals survived the war, spending 3 years in prisoner of war camps before repatriation to Germany in 1945. In post-war interviews, he described Operation Torch as the moment he understood Germany would lose the naval war. "We trained to fight 8 escorts," he explained. "We had tactics for 8 escorts. Our boats were designed for operations against 8 escorts. But when 50 destroyers protect 100 ships, all our training and tactics become irrelevant. That's not a military problem. That's a mathematical impossibility." The other commanders who survived offered similar assessments. Bucker, who somehow brought U-173 back to port despite extensive damage, wrote in his patrol report, "Enemy escort density exceeded all previous experience. Standard attack methods invite suicide. Recommend major tactical revision or acceptance that heavily defended convoys represent operationally unfeasible targets." Von Forstner's report contained one particularly telling observation. The enemy appears to possess unlimited destroyer resources. Every attempted approach brought multiple escorts to prosecute contact. Where previously we might face 2 or 3 hunters, we now encounter 6 or 8. This cannot represent temporary concentration. Enemy production capacity must exceed intelligence estimates by orders of magnitude. That final assessment proved prophetic. American destroyer and escort production in 1943 exceeded 400 vessels, more than Germany's entire destroyer fleet at war's beginning. Escort carrier production reached 50 units. Merchant shipbuilding approached 3,000 vessels. The industrial mobilization that seemed impossible in 1941 had become reality by 1943, producing war material at scales beyond Axis comprehension. The mathematics of industrial warfare had overwhelmed tactical excellence. German submarine crews, among the most professionally trained and courageously committed fighting men of the war, couldn't compensate for fundamental resource deficiencies. 1,000 brilliant submarine attacks couldn't sink 10,000 merchant ships when the enemy built replacements faster than attacks could be mounted. Operation Torch's naval lessons extended far beyond anti-submarine warfare. The operation demonstrated that properly organized and resourced amphibious assault could succeed against defended coastlines. That lesson led directly to Sicily, Italy, Normandy, and the island-hopping campaigns across the Pacific. The integration of air, surface, and electronic warfare capabilities foreshadowed modern joint operations doctrine. The coordination of massive logistics across thousands of miles presaged future military operations requiring global reach. But perhaps the operation's most profound lesson concerned the relationship between technology, resources, and tactical execution. Germany began the war with superior submarine technology and more experienced crews. Britain and America countered with superior industrial capacity and organizational sophistication. When those advantages, combined with technological improvements, radar, sonar, Huff-Duff, escort carriers, the tactical balance shifted irrevocably. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe. The German submariners who encountered Operation Torch's escort forces experienced warfare's fundamental truth in its most brutal form. Quality matters, but quantity can overwhelm quality. Training and courage matter, but industrial capacity determines victory in total war. Tactical excellence matters, but strategic resource advantage makes tactics irrelevant. They went to sea expecting 40 merchants protected by 8 escorts. They found 100 ships guarded by 50 destroyers. That mathematical reality, more than any tactical defeat or technological surprise, marked the beginning of the end for Germany's submarine campaign. The ocean had learned to answer back with overwhelming force, and the hunters discovered they had become the hunted.